Last Christmas Eve, my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "We need family space." Then she slammed the door, leaving me in the snow, clutching the gift I bought for my granddaughter. That moment broke something inside me, but it also lit a fire. I started recording every word, every betrayal. For 12 long months, I built an airtight case around a $50 million family betrayal. And tonight, I'm walking back into that same house with proof that will turn their greed into downfall. This is more than a drama. It's a true family revenge, a karma story that shows patience can become the sharpest weapon. If you want to hear justice served ice cold like this video, and follow for more powerful stories. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The snow was falling harder than it had all winter, each flake catching the warm glow from the Christmas lights strung across the front porch. I pulled my old Buick into the driveway at 47 Maple Street, the house I had bought for my son Michael and his family 15 years ago. The radio was playing Silent Night, and for a moment, everything felt like it should, like Christmas was supposed to feel. I reached into the passenger seat for the carefully wrapped present I had picked out for Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter. It was a vintage leather journal, the kind she had admired when we visited that antique shop downtown last summer, back when she still had time for her grandfather. Back when I was still welcome in what used to feel like home. The front door was decorated with a wreath Laura had probably ordered online. Everything about this house bore her touch now, from the perfectly manicured lawn to the expensive SUV parked where my old truck used to sit. I knocked gently, hearing the familiar sounds of family gathering inside. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the low murmur of the football game playing in the background. Michael opened the door, and for just a second his face lit up the way it used to when he was Emma's age. But then I saw her over his shoulder, Laura, standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, wearing that expression I had come to know so well. The one that said I was interrupting something important. "Dad," Michael said, his voice already apologetic in that way that made my chest tighten. "I didn't know you were coming by tonight." "I brought something for Emma," I said, holding up the wrapped gift. "Just wanted to wish everyone a Merry Christmas." That's when Laura stepped forward, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier she had insisted on installing. The same chandelier I had paid for, like everything else in this house. "Edward," she said, her voice carrying that familiar chill, "we're having a family moment here. We really need our space tonight. Family moment." The words hit me like a physical blow. I was standing at the door of a house I had bought, looking at my son and granddaughter, and somehow I was not part of the family moment. I could see Emma at the top of the stairs, still in her Christmas pajamas, looking down at us with confusion in her dark eyes. Those eyes that reminded me so much of my late wife, Margaret. Emma started to come down, her face brightening when she saw me, but Laura's sharp glance stopped her cold. "Emma, go help in the kitchen," Laura commanded without taking her eyes off me. My granddaughter hesitated, looking from her mother to me, clearly torn. I managed a smile and a small wave, trying to show her everything was fine, even though my heart was breaking. She waved back tentatively before disappearing around the corner. Michael stood there like a statue, saying nothing. Not defending me, not inviting me in, not even looking me in the eye. Just standing there while his wife made it clear that his father wasn't welcome in his own family's Christmas celebration. "I understand," I said finally, though I didn't understand at all. "Just give this to Emma when you get a chance." I held out the gift, and Michael took it with hands that shook slightly. For a moment our eyes met, and I saw something there. Shame, maybe, or regret, but not enough to change anything. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. "Merry Christmas." The door closed with a soft click, and I was alone on the porch again. Through the frosted window I could see the warm yellow light spilling across the living room where my family was gathered. Without me. I could hear them talking, laughing, continuing their Christmas evening as if nothing had happened, as if I had never been there at all. The cold bit through my coat as I walked back to my car, my boots crunching in the snow that was still falling. Silent Night was ending on the radio, replaced by some cheerful commercial about holiday sales. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, watching the house where I no longer belonged. 72 years old, and I was spending Christmas Eve alone in my car, looking at a life I had built with my own hands, but could no longer touch. The money I had earned through 4 decades of hard work, the sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had poured into this family, all of it seemed meaningless now. But as I sat there in the falling snow, listening to the distant sound of their celebration, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the way Laura had looked at me, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. Maybe it was seeing Emma's confused face, watching her torn between love for her grandfather and obedience to her mother. Or maybe it was the simple, devastating realization that this was my new reality. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the warm lights and laughter. As I drove home to my empty apartment, I had no way of knowing that this cold December night would become the turning point of everything. That sometimes the moments that break you are the same ones that show you exactly what you're made of. If you've ever felt like a burden in your own family, remember this: that moment doesn't diminish you. It just opens the door to reclaiming your dignity. I wasn't always the man sitting alone in his car on Christmas Eve. There was a time when my hands built things that mattered and my word meant something in this town. I was 32 when I came back from Vietnam, still hearing the helicopters in my sleep, but determined to build something good with whatever years I had left. The GI Bill got me into technical college, and I learned everything I could about machinery, about fixing things that were broken. Started as a mechanic at Henderson Manufacturing, working the early shift so I could take night classes in business management. Margaret was waiting for me. When I got back, patient as a saint, through all those months when I'd wake up screaming. She married a broken soldier and helped him become a man worth something. We had Michael when I was 34, then David 2 years later, and Karen 3 years after that. 3 kids who needed everything I could give them and more. I worked my way up from mechanic to foreman to floor supervisor, putting in 60-hour weeks, because that's what it took. By the time I was 45, I had saved enough to start my own small contracting business, Miller Construction. Nothing fancy, just honest work. Residential repairs, small commercial jobs, the kind of steady business that pays the bills and builds a future. For 40 years, I got up before sunrise and came home after dark. Missed some baseball games, missed some school plays, but I never missed a mortgage payment or a college tuition bill. I sent all 3 of my kids through university. Debt-free, bought Michael and Laura their house, helped David with his down payment in Colorado, made sure Karen had everything she needed for her wedding. $50 million? That's what 4 decades of careful living and smart investing had built. Not bad for a kid from the wrong side of town who came home from war with nothing but nightmares and determination. Saturdays were for Little League games when the kids were young, Sundays for church and family dinners. I coached Michael's baseball team for 6 years, never missed a game. Taught David how to change a tire in the church parking lot after youth group. Walked Karen down the aisle at St. Matthew's, the same church where Margaret and I had said our vows 38 years earlier. This was a community that knew me, respected the Miller name. I'd served on the church board, volunteered for Habitat for Humanity, never missed a Memorial Day ceremony at the Veterans Cemetery, where I'd someday rest beside Margaret. But somehow, standing in Laura's perfectly decorated dining room last Thanksgiving, surrounded by the family I had sacrificed everything to build, I felt smaller than I had since those first nights back from the jungle. Uncle Edward's been telling us about his latest doctor visit. Laura announced to the table full of relatives, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted everyone to pay attention. Apparently, the VA has him on some new medication for his blood pressure. The way she said it made it sound like I was falling apart, like I was some charity case living off government handouts. 20 people around that table, including Michael's cousins and their kids, all looking at me like I was the family burden. The VA has been very good to me, I said, quietly trying to keep the peace. After 40 years of paying into the system, I'm grateful for the medical coverage. Laura laughed, that brittle sound that made my teeth ache. Oh, Edward, you're so modest. Tell them about all those benefits you collect. The disability payments, the pension, all of it. You've really mastered the system. She made it sound like I was gaming the system, like I was some kind of welfare fraud instead of a veteran who had earned every penny through service and sacrifice. I saw some of the younger relatives exchange glances, probably wondering why this old man was taking money he didn't deserve. Laura, Michael said softly, but he didn't defend me. Never did. I'm just saying, she continued, cutting into her turkey with aggressive precision. It's nice to have that safety net. Some of us have to actually work for our money. That night, after everyone had gone home and I was helping clear dishes, I overheard her talking to her friend Nancy in the kitchen. They thought I had gone to use the bathroom, but I was just around the corner stacking plates like I had been asked to do. I swear, Nancy, I don't know how much longer we can deal with this, Laura was saying. He's getting more difficult every year, and frankly, it's affecting Michael's ability to move forward with his career. What do you mean? Nancy asked. Well, for one thing, he's sitting on all this money that should be helping the family now when we need it. Michael's got opportunities, real estate investments that could set us up for life, but Edward keeps everything locked away like some kind of miser. I stopped moving, holding a stack of plates so tightly I was surprised they didn't shatter. How much are we talking about? Nancy whispered. Enough to matter, a lot. And here's the thing, sooner or later, all of that money is going to be ours anyway. I'm Michael's wife, Emma's mother. When the old man finally goes, everything comes to us. It's just a matter of time. The casual way she said it, like she was discussing the weather or planning a vacation, hit me harder than any of her public humiliations had. She wasn't just waiting for me to die, she was counting on it, planning for it, building her future around my funeral. I finished stacking the dishes and walked back to the living room where Michael was watching football with David, who had driven down from Colorado for the holiday. My son looked up at me, and for a second I thought about telling him what I had just heard. But what would be the point? He already knew who his wife was. He had chosen her over me a long time ago. Thanks for dinner, I said instead. I think I'll head home now. Already, Dad? David asked. The game's not over. I'm tired, I said, which was true in more ways than one. Long day. I drove home that night thinking about everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed, and how quickly it could all disappear. Not because of market crashes or bad investments, but because the people I had trusted most in the world were already dividing up my life like I was already gone. But sitting in my apartment that night, I realized something important. Laura was right about one thing. Sooner or later, the truth about all of this was going to come out. She just had no idea how or when or who would be controlling that conversation. Every conspiracy eventually reveals itself. When you're being betrayed, the truth is just waiting for its moment to surface. The notebook was just a simple composition book I picked up at the drugstore, black and white marbled cover like the ones kids use for school. But from the day after Thanksgiving, it became my most important possession. I started writing everything down, every conversation, every slight, every moment when Laura showed her true colors. November 28th. Laura told Nancy that my money would be ours anyway when I die. Direct quote. Kitchen conversation, 47 p.m. December the 2nd. Laura complained to Michael about my interference in their financial planning. Said I was being selfish by not liquidating assets to help with their opportunities. December 5th. Overheard Laura on phone with someone discussing my situation. She used the phrase, taking care of the problem. The small digital recorder was harder to find. Most stores don't carry them anymore. Everything's on phones now. But I found one at an electronics shop downtown about the size of a cigarette pack. The sales kid looked at me like I was some kind of relic, but I didn't care, Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. By the second week of December, I knew I needed professional help. Harold Harris had been my attorney for 23 years, handled the incorporation of my business, my Will Margaret's estate, when she passed. He was one of the few people left in this town who remembered when I was somebody who mattered. His office hadn't changed much, same oak furniture and law books that probably hadn't been opened in a decade. Harold looked older, grayer, but his eyes were still sharp behind those wire-rimmed glasses. "Edward," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. "What brings you by? Everything all right with the will?" I set the notebook on his desk along with the small recorder. "Harold, I think my family is planning to take everything I've worked for." He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. We'd known each other long enough that he could read my moods, knew I wasn't given to paranoia or wild accusations. "Tell me what's happening." I told him about the conversations I'd overheard, about Laura's increasingly bold statements about the way they were talking around me like I was already gone. Harold listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "What do you want to do about it?" he asked when I finished. "I want to protect what I've built, but I want to do it right." Harold nodded slowly. "My advice, don't get angry. Don't confront them yet. Keep documenting everything. Anger makes people sloppy, Edward. Silence and evidence will protect you better than any argument ever could." That's when he told me about estate planning options I'd never considered, about trusts and legal structures that could put my assets beyond anyone's reach. But first, we needed to know exactly what we were dealing with. "Be patient," Harold said as I was leaving. "Let them show you who they really are." I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Laura arrived at my apartment unannounced. Michael was with her, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a guilty child. "Edward," Laura said, settling herself on my couch like she owned it. "We need to talk about some practical matters." She had brought papers, legal documents that she spread across my coffee table with the confidence of someone who had already won. "What's this about?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "It's a power of attorney," Michael said, quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Just a precaution, Dad, in case something happens to you." "Something like what?" "Well, you're 72 years old," Laura said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when she thought she was being reasonable. "What if you have a stroke? What if you can't make decisions? Someone needs to be able to access your accounts, manage your affairs." I picked up the papers, scanning the legal language. It was comprehensive, giving them control over everything. My bank accounts, my investments, my property. Everything I had spent 4 decades building. "I appreciate the concern," I said, setting the papers down. "But I'm not ready for this." Laura's mask slipped just a little. "Edward, be reasonable. Who else is going to handle this? David's in Colorado. Karen's got her own family. Michael is your oldest son, and I have experience managing finances." I said, "I'm not ready." "Dad?" Michael started, but Laura held up her hand. "Fine," she said, her voice turning cold. "But when something happens, don't expect us to drop everything to clean up your mess. You want to be stubborn? You want to keep us all in the dark about your finances while you hoard everything like some kind of miser." She was getting louder, her composure cracking. "Do you want us to go bankrupt while you sit on millions? Do you want Michael to lose opportunities because you're too paranoid to trust your own family?" "Laura, please," Michael said, but she was just getting started. "No, Michael, he needs to hear this. We've been patient, we've been respectful, but this is ridiculous. You're hurting your own son with this selfishness." I looked at Michael, waiting for him to say something to defend me, or at least ask her to lower her voice. But he just stood there staring at his shoes. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "Not until you sign these papers." "I'm not signing anything today." Laura grabbed the papers and shoved them into her purse. "Fine, but this isn't over, Edward. We're not going away." After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about what Harold had told me, about patience and evidence, about letting them show me who they really were. The recorder had been in my shirt pocket the entire time. That night, I got my first real breakthrough. Laura was on the phone with someone, probably Michael's cousin Sam, and she didn't realize how thin the walls were in my building. I pressed the recorder against the shared wall and listened to her side of the conversation. "He's getting more difficult every day, Sam. We tried to get him to sign the power of attorney, but he refused." Pause. "No, Michael was useless as usual." Pause. I know, but we can't wait forever. Maybe we need to push harder." Pause. "What do you mean make him sign?" Long pause. "The property on Cedar Street. That could work. If we can get him to sell that, we'd have enough to move forward with the investment." I kept the recorder running until she hung up, capturing 20 minutes of the most damning conversation I'd ever heard. They weren't just waiting for me to die anymore. They were planning to force my hand. But as I sat there in the dark, listening to that recording for the third time, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I had something they didn't know about. Something they couldn't take away. Don't waste energy arguing. Evidence is a stronger weapon than any words you could ever speak. Sam Miller had always been the family opportunist, Michael's cousin, who showed up at every wedding and funeral with his hand out and his eyes on whatever he could get. He was 50 years old and had never held a steady job for more than 2 years, but somehow he always managed to dress well and drive a decent car. Now I knew where his latest financing was coming from. The first sign that he was actively working against me came at Karen's birthday dinner in mid-December. The whole family was there, crammed into the back room of Romano's Italian restaurant, the same place we'd been celebrating family occasions for 20 years. But something felt different this time. There were whispered conversations that stopped when I approached, meaningful glances exchanged across the table, a general sense that I was being discussed rather than included. Sam positioned himself at the opposite end of the table from me, close enough to Karen and her husband Tom that he could speak to them without me hearing. But I caught fragments, words like difficult and stubborn and getting worse. When I tried to join their conversation, Sam would smoothly change the subject to sports or whether his politicians smile, never wavering. During dessert, he stood up to make a toast. "To Karen," he said, raising his wine glass. 47 years old and still the voice of reason in this crazy family. Everyone laughed and drank, but I noticed how he emphasized voice of reason, looking directly at Karen when he said it. After dinner, I was walking to my car when I heard voices from the smoking area behind the restaurant. Sam's voice, low and urgent, talking to someone I couldn't see. "Look, I'm just saying it's getting to the point where somebody needs to step in." The man's 72 years old, living alone, making questionable decisions with a fortune that could set this whole family up for life. I moved closer, staying in the shadows. "He should be in a place where professionals can take care of him," Sam continued. "One of those nice retirement communities where he can play cards and watch TV and not worry about managing all that money. Leave the financial decisions to people who actually understand how to make money work." "I don't know, Sam," came a woman's voice, Karen. "Dad's always been sharp with money, built everything from nothing. 20 years ago, maybe. But have you seen him lately? Really looked at him, he's declining, Karen. And meanwhile, Michael's missing opportunities, real investment chances because everything's locked up in Edward's accounts gathering dust. Laura's been saying the same thing. Laura's got her head on straight. She sees the big picture. Your dad's not going to live forever. And when he goes, do you want to inherit a mess of outdated investments and property that's been mismanaged by someone who's stuck in the past? Or do you want to inherit a portfolio that's been professionally managed and grown by people who know what they're doing? I heard Karen sigh. "I just don't like talking about Dad like he's already gone. I'm not talking about him being gone. I'm talking about him being taken care of properly while he's still here. Think about Emma. Think about Michael's future. Think about your own kids. This isn't about being heartless. It's about being practical." I'd heard enough. I walked back to my car, my hands shaking as I started the engine. Sam wasn't just supporting Laura's plan, he was actively recruiting allies using family loyalty and financial pressure to build a coalition against me. That night, David called from Colorado. It was late, nearly 11, and I almost didn't answer because I figured it was another one of Laura's supporters checking to see if I was still competent enough to use a telephone. "Dad?" David's voice was warm, familiar, unchanged by whatever poison was being spread about me. "How are you doing?" I know the holidays can be tough since Mom died. Just hearing his voice made me feel less alone. "I'm managing, son. How are things in Denver?" "Busy as always. Listen, I wanted to let you know I'm going to try to make it home for Christmas next year. I know I've been saying that for 3 years now, but I mean it this time. I want to spend the holidays with you." "I'd like that very much." There was a pause, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. "Dad, is everything okay? I got a weird call from Michael yesterday. Something about you being difficult about some legal papers. So they were already working on David, trying to get him on their side." "It's complicated, son." "Well, whatever it is, don't let them pressure you into anything you're not comfortable with. You've always been the smartest man I know when it comes to money and business. Trust your instincts." After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. David at least still believed in me. The real confrontation came 3 days later. Laura had arranged another family meeting at Michael's house, ostensibly to discuss Christmas plans, but really to apply more pressure about the power of attorney. Sam was there, of course, along with Karen and her husband Tom. Michael looked miserable sitting at his own dining table while his wife ran the show. "Edward," Laura began, her voice artificially sweet, "we've all been talking and we're concerned about you. All of you." I looked around the table. Karen wouldn't meet my eyes. Tom was studying his hands. Michael was staring at the wall. "Your isolation isn't healthy," Sam said, jumping in with practiced smoothness. "Living alone, not trusting anyone with important decisions. It's not good for you, and frankly, it's not fair to your family. What Sam means," Laura continued, "is that we all love you, but love sometimes means making hard choices." That's when she laid out their plan. A nice, assisted living facility. Professional management of my finances. Regular family visits, of course, but in a structured environment, where I wouldn't have to worry about the burden of managing my affairs. I listened to the whole presentation without saying a word, watching my family carve up my life like they were planning a vacation. When Laura finished, they all looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to thank them for their concern, and sign whatever papers they had prepared. "No," I said simply. "Dad," Michael started, but Laura cut him off. "Edward, you're not thinking clearly. This is what's best for everyone." I said no. "You're being selfish," Sam said, his politician's mask slipping. "You're hurting your own son with this stubbornness." That's when Michael finally snapped. He'd been sitting there like a statue while they discussed putting his father in a home, while they talked about taking away everything I'd worked for, while they planned my life without consulting me. But when Sam called me selfish, something inside him broke. "That's enough, Sam." Michael said, his voice louder than I'd heard it in years. "Whatever issues we have, whatever needs to be decided, that's still my father you're talking about." The room went quiet. Laura stared at her husband like he'd grown a second head. Sam's mouth fell open. Karen looked up for the first time all evening. "Michael," Laura said, her voice carrying a warning. "No, Laura, I'm tired of this. Sam's not even family, not really, and he's sitting here talking about putting my father in a home like Dad's, some kind of problem to be solved." Michael looked at me directly for the first time in months. "Dad might be stubborn, and we might not always agree, but he built everything this family has. He deserves better than this." It wasn't a complete defense, wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was something. For just a moment, my son remembered who I was and what I meant to this family. The meeting fell apart after that, everyone leaving in awkward silence. But as I drove home, I realized something important. I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. and the people working against me weren't as united as they believed. When you feel completely isolated, remember this: not everyone has turned their back on you. Sometimes the people who matter most are just waiting for the right moment to stand up. Harold's office felt different on that cold January morning, more like a war room than a law office. The mahogany conference table was covered with documents, financial statements, and legal papers that would change everything. Harold had called in Rebecca Chen, his estate planning specialist, a sharp woman in her 40s who spoke about trusts and tax law like a general discussing battle strategy. The revocable living trust is your best option, Rebecca explained, spreading out the documents. It gives you complete control during your lifetime, but it removes the assets from probate and provides significant tax advantages. More importantly for your situation, it makes it much harder for anyone to challenge your decisions or gain unauthorized access to your money. Harold leaned forward, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Edward, this restructure will move all of your major assets into the trust. Your bank accounts, investment portfolios, the rental properties, everything. You'll be the trustee during your lifetime, maintaining full control, but legally, the money won't be yours in the traditional sense. What does that mean for Laura and her plans? I asked. It means, Rebecca said with a slight smile, that any power of attorney documents any claim she might make as Michael's wife, any legal maneuvering she's been planning, becomes meaningless. The trust supersedes all of that. We spent 4 hours going through every detail. The trust would be funded with my entire $50 million estate. My children would be the ultimate beneficiaries, but with strict conditions about character and loyalty that I would define in a separate document. Harold would serve as successor trustee if anything happened to me, ensuring my wishes were followed regardless of family pressure. There's something else, I said as we were finishing up. I pulled out my recorder and played Harold, the conversation I'd captured between Laura and Sam. Rebecca's eyebrows rose as she heard them discussing forcing me to sign documents and manipulating the sale of my property. "This is elder financial abuse," she said immediately. "What they're planning could constitute fraud and coercion. This recording gives you significant protection. By the end of January, everything was transferred. 50 years of hard work and careful investing moved into the Edward Miller Revocable Living Trust with the stroke of a pen." I felt lighter somehow, knowing that my assets were protected from schemes I was only beginning to understand. I didn't have to wait long to see how right Rebecca had been. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February. Mr. Coleman from First National Bank, his voice careful and professional. "Mr. Miller, I thought you should know that Mrs. Laura Miller came in yesterday with some documents claiming to have financial power of attorney over your accounts." "What kind of documents?" "Old banking forms, some legal papers that looked official but weren't properly notarized. She was quite insistent, demanded to see your account balances, and wanted to initiate several large transfers." I had known this was coming, but hearing it still made my stomach tighten. "What did you tell her?" "Exactly what you instructed me to say when we set up the trust, that the accounts in question had been restructured and she had no authority over them." "How did she react?" Coleman paused, and I could hear him choosing his words diplomatically. "She was upset, very upset. Demanded to speak to the bank president, threatened legal action, accused us of elder abuse. She had another man with her, claimed to be family, who became quite aggressive with my staff." That would be Sam, I thought. Probably figured his smooth talking would work on bank employees the same way it worked on family members. "Mr. Coleman, I appreciate you handling this professionally." "Of course, sir. But I should warn you, they seemed quite shocked by the news. I don't think they're going to give up easily." He was right. That evening, my phone rang 6 times in 2 hours. Laura, Michael, Sam, even Karen, all wanting to know what I had done and why. I let them all go to voicemail, listening to their messages get progressively more frustrated and demanding. Laura's final message was the most revealing. "Edward, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this affects your entire family. Michael has investors waiting real opportunities that require immediate capital. You can't just lock away millions of dollars out of spite. Call me back immediately so we can fix this. Fix this. Like my protecting my own money was a mistake that needed correcting. The next morning, Harold called with an update. Laura contacted my office yesterday, claimed there had been some kind of mistake with your banking arrangements. She wanted copies of the trust documents, said she needed them for family planning purposes. I hope you told her where she could file that request. Harold chuckled. In more diplomatic language, yes. But Edward, she's clearly not giving up. My guess is she's going to try a different approach now. He was right again. 2 days later, Michael showed up at my apartment looking haggard and desperate. His usual expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't been sleeping. Dad, we need to talk. I let him in. Made coffee, waited for him to explain why he looked like his world was falling apart. Laura says you've done something with your money, moved it somewhere we can't access it. Your wife was trying to steal from me, Michael. From your own father. She wasn't stealing, she was trying to help. We have opportunities, investments that could triple the family's wealth, but we need capital to make them work. I studied my son's face, seeing the strain there, the pressure he was under. What kind of opportunities require you to take money without asking? Michael's composure cracked. The Henderson property deal. 40 acres of prime development land, but we need $3 million down by the end of the month or we lose it. Laura thought, we thought you'd want to help once you understood the potential return. So you decided to steal $3 million from me rather than ask. It wasn't stealing. It was family money that's going to be ours eventually anyway. There it was again, that phrase that had started all of this. Money that would be theirs eventually. Like I was already dead, like my 40 years of work belonged to them by right rather than by gift. Michael, I said quietly, that money is in a trust now. Even if I wanted to give it to you, which I don't, it's not a simple matter anymore. Then change it back. No. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. Dad, please. Laura's going crazy. Sam's telling everyone you've lost your mind. They're talking about having you declared incompetent. Let them try. Michael left without finishing his coffee, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. But as I watched him drive away, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had something they wanted and couldn't take. That evening, I called Harold to give him an update. They're going to escalate, I told him. Laura's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. I'm counting on it, Harold said. Every move they make now just proves what we've suspected all along. They're not concerned about your welfare, Edward. They're concerned about your money. And now, they can't get to it. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Rebecca had been right about something else. Greedy people always assume they're in control, always believe they can manipulate their way to what they want. But justice has a way of cutting them off at exactly the right moment. The greedy always think they're in control, but justice has a way of stopping them, just when it matters most. The soft knock on my apartment door came at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon in March, so quiet, I almost missed it over the television. When I opened the door, Emma was standing in the hallway holding a paper plate covered with aluminum foil, looking around nervously like she was afraid someone had followed her. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I brought you something." She had walked the 12 blocks from her house to my apartment building carrying a plate of chocolate chip cookies she had baked herself. At 16, she was becoming more beautiful every day, with her grandmother's dark eyes and gentle smile. But there was something fragile about her now that broke my heart. The tension at home was wearing on her too. "Emma, sweetheart, does your mother know you're here?" "She thinks I'm at the library." She glanced down the hallway again. "Can I come in just for a few minutes?" I stepped aside and led her into my small living room. She had only been to my apartment twice since I moved out of the house, both times with her parents for awkward, stilted visits that ended as quickly as politeness allowed. But now alone with me, she seemed to relax for the first time in months. "I made these yesterday." she said, pulling back the foil to reveal perfectly golden cookies, still soft in the centers. I remember you always liked the ones with extra chocolate chips. You remembered right. I took one and bit into it, the familiar sweetness, bringing back memories of better times. These are perfect, honey, just like your grandmother used to make. Emma settled onto my couch, tucking her legs under her like she used to do when she was little, and I would read her stories. Grandpa, I hate what's happening with our family. I know you do, sweetheart. Mom and Dad fight about you all the time now. Mom says you're being difficult, but I don't understand what that means. You've always been nice to me. I sat down beside her, careful not to crowd her, letting her talk at her own pace. She says you're sick, that you're not thinking clearly anymore, but you seem fine to me. You seem like the same grandpa who taught me to fish and helped me with my science projects. What do you think, Emma? She was quiet for a long moment, chewing on her lower lip the way she had since she was 5 years old. I think Mom wants something from you and she's mad that you won't give it to her. Smart girl, too smart for her own good, maybe. Grandpa, I need to tell you something. I don't care about your money. I know everyone thinks that's what families are supposed to care about, inheritance and all that stuff, but I just want you to be around. I want you to come to my graduation next year. I want you to meet my boyfriend when I finally get one. I want you to be my grandpa, not some stranger I see at Christmas. The honesty in her voice, the simple clarity of what she wanted, hit me harder than all of Laura's manipulations and Sam's schemes combined. This was what family was supposed to be about. Love without conditions, loyalty without price tags. Emma, you are the greatest gift I have ever received. Better than any business deal, any investment, any amount of money I've ever made. You're my legacy in ways that matter more than bank accounts. She smiled, then the first genuine smile I had seen from her in months. Really, really. And I want you to remember that no matter what happens with the rest of the family, you and I, we understand each other. We spent the next hour talking about school, her friends, her plans for college, normal grandfather-granddaughter conversation, the kind I had been starved for since this whole mess began. She told me about her English teacher who was encouraging her to apply to journalism programs, about the boy in her chemistry class who was too shy to ask her to prom, about her plans to spend the summer working at the animal shelter. As she was getting ready to leave, I found myself saying something I hadn't planned. Emma, I want you to know that I'm planning something special for next Christmas. Something that's going to change everything for our family. Her eyes lit up. What kind of something? I can't tell you yet, but it's going to be big. Bigger than anything that's happened in this family for years. Is it good big or bad big? I thought about that for a moment. That depends on who you ask, but I think you'll like it. She hugged me then, fierce and tight, holding on like she was afraid I might disappear. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about the conversation. Emma was the one pure thing in this mess, the one person whose motives I never had to question. Whatever I did, whatever choices I made about the trust and the money and the future, I had to make sure she was protected. But I had made a mistake, letting my emotions get the better of my judgment. I shouldn't have mentioned next Christmas, shouldn't have hinted at changes coming. Emma was 16, excited by the prospect of surprises and family drama. I should have known she wouldn't be able to keep that information to herself. The call came 2 days later, Laura's voice sharp with barely controlled panic. Edward, I need to ask you something and I want a straight answer. What's that, Laura? Emma came home yesterday talking about some big surprise you're planning for Christmas. What did you tell her? I could hear the fear underneath her anger. Laura was smart enough to know that any surprise I was planning probably wasn't going to work in her favor. I told her I was planning something special for the family. What kind of special? You'll have to wait and see, just like everyone else. There was a long pause, and I could almost hear her mind working, calculating possibilities, trying to figure out what I might be planning and how she could counteract it. Edward, I hope you're not planning to do something that would hurt this family Emma doesn't need to be in the middle of whatever issues you have with us. Emma is exactly where she should be, I said quietly. Right in the heart of her family, loved and protected. What's that supposed to mean? It means that some people in this family understand what family actually means, and some people are about to learn. Laura hung up without saying goodbye, but I knew she'd be on the phone with Sam within minutes trying to figure out what I was planning and how they could stop it. Let them worry. Let them spend the next 9 months wondering what was coming. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was looking forward to Christmas. In the darkness, there's always one candle still burning. Don't forget the younger generation still knows how to love. Karen had always been the quiet one, the middle child who observed more than she spoke, and kept her thoughts to herself until she was absolutely certain of her ground. So when she called me in early October, her voice tight with controlled anger, I knew something significant had happened. Dad, we need to talk. Not on the phone. Can I come over tonight? She arrived at 8 o'clock carrying her laptop and looking like she hadn't slept in days. Karen worked as an IT administrator for a marketing firm, which meant she understood computers and digital communications better than the rest of the family combined. That expertise was about to prove invaluable. I've been watching what's happening to you, she said, settling into my kitchen chair and opening her laptop. Watching Laura and Sam manipulate everyone, watching Michael get caught in the middle, watching this family tear itself apart. I couldn't just sit by anymore. What did you find? Sam's been sloppy with his email security. He uses the same password for everything, including the shared computer at Mom's old craft room that he borrows when he visits Michael and Laura. I still have access to that system from when I helped Mom set up her online banking before she died. She turned the laptop toward me, showing me a Gmail account I didn't recognize. This is Sam's personal email. He's been coordinating with Laura for months, planning exactly how they're going to handle what they call the Edward situation. The first email she showed me was dated 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, just days after I'd overheard Laura talking about my money becoming ours anyway. Laura, we need to move faster on the old man. Michael's too soft to push hard, but we can't let this drag out forever. I've been talking to a lawyer about conservatorship options if the power of attorney doesn't work. There are ways to have someone declared incompetent if we have enough family members willing to testify about his declining mental state. I felt sick reading it, but Karen wasn't finished. Here's one from February, right after you set up the trust. She scrolled to another message. The bank situation is a setback, but not permanent. We need to regroup and think longer term. Once Edward passes, the trust can be contested if we can show he wasn't of sound mind when he created it. Start documenting every example of erratic behavior, every sign of mental decline. We need to build a case that his decisions over the past year were the result of dementia or paranoia, not clear thinking. They're planning to challenge my mental competency even after I'm dead. I said, the full scope of their scheme finally becoming clear. Karen nodded grimly. It gets worse. Look at this one from last month. Laura, I've been thinking about the property distribution. Once we establish that Edward's recent decisions were made under mental duress, we should be able to get the assets divided equally among the children. That means Michael gets his third, but so do David and Karen. However, if Michael is the primary caregiver, and Laura has been managing the family finances, there could be grounds for additional compensation. We're looking at potentially $15-20 million for your family alone, maybe more, if we can show that David and Karen were less involved in Edward's care. I stared at the screen, seeing my daughter's name included in their calculations, like she was already part of their scheme. Karen, they're planning to steal from you too? I know. Sam figures he can manipulate me the same way he's been manipulating everyone else. He's been calling me weekly, asking about your mental state, trying to get me to agree that you've been acting strangely. And what have you been telling him? Until now, I've been non-committal. But I've been listening to everything, watching everything, waiting to see how far they were willing to go. She closed the laptop and looked at me directly. Dad, they're going to destroy you if they can. and they're going to destroy this family in the process. What do you want to do about it? I want to help you fight back." That night we spent 3 hours going through Sam's emails, finding message after message that documented the conspiracy against me. Plans to isolate me from family members, strategies for challenging my mental competency calculations, about how to divide my assets after they managed to have my recent legal decisions overturned. But we needed more than email evidence. We needed to see how they would react under pressure, needed to understand who in the family would stand with them, and who might choose a different path. "I have an idea," I told Karen as she was getting ready to leave, "but it's going to require some acting on my part." 2 weeks later, I put my plan into motion. I called Michael and asked him to arrange a family dinner for the following Sunday. "There's something important I need to discuss with everyone," I told him. "Something about my health." The word health was like blood in the water. Within hours, Laura had called to ask what kind of health issues I was having. Sam called the next day, his voice full of fake concern. Even David called from Colorado, genuinely worried about his father. Sunday dinner at Michael's house felt like a tribunal. Laura had cooked my favorite pot roast, but the gesture felt more like a last meal than a family gathering. Sam was there, of course, sitting close to Laura, and wearing an expression of practiced concern. Karen and her husband Tom sat across from me, Karen's face carefully neutral. Emma kept glancing at me anxiously, clearly picking up on the tension in the room. Michael looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I waited until after dessert to drop my bombshell. "I asked you all here because I've been having some health issues lately." I began watching their faces carefully. Chest pains, shortness of breath, dizzy spells. "My doctor wants to run some tests, but he's concerned it might be my heart." Emma's face went pale immediately. "Grandpa, are you okay?" "I hope so, sweetheart. But at my age, these things can be serious. I might need to go into the hospital for a few days next week for tests." I watched Laura and Sam exchange a quick glance, and I caught something in Laura's expression. Not concern, but calculation. Like she was already thinking about what my hospitalization might mean for their plans. "Dad," Michael said, his voice strained, "why didn't you tell us sooner?" "I didn't want to worry anyone until I knew more." "Well, you're going to be fine," Sam said, his tone just a little too hearty. "Modern medicine can work miracles these days, but this is exactly why we've been concerned about you living alone. What if something happens and no one's there to help? Maybe this is a sign that it's time to consider some of the options we've discussed," Laura added. "Professional care people who can monitor your health properly." There it was. Less than 5 minutes after I mentioned health problems, they were already talking about moving me out of my home. But Emma's reaction was completely different. She got up from her chair and came around the table to hug me, tears in her eyes. "Grandpa, I'm so scared. Promise me you're going to be okay." "I promise I'm going to do everything I can to stay healthy for you," I told her, meaning every word. Michael looked genuinely confused and upset, torn between concern for his father and pressure from his wife. But Karen's reaction surprised me most of all. "Dad," she said, her voice steady and clear, "whatever happens, whatever you need, I'm here for you. No conditions, no agenda, just family." Michael had been sitting quietly through most of dinner, but Karen's declaration seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He looked at me across the table, really looked at me for the first time in months. "Dad, he started, then stopped, his voice catching. "I've been such a coward. Sitting here listening to everyone talk about taking care of you, and I know I should have been the one saying it. I should have been protecting you all along." Laura shot him a warning look, but Michael didn't even notice. "Every night I go to sleep knowing I failed you. Knowing I chose the easy path instead of the right path." He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "But hearing Sam and Laura talk tonight, hearing the way they discuss you like you're already gone, I can't pretend anymore. I can't keep being the son who disappoints you." After dinner, as people were getting ready to leave, Karen lingered behind. When we were alone in the kitchen, she whispered, "That was a test, wasn't it? What do you think?" "I think Laura and Sam just failed it spectacularly." As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. I had an ally now, someone inside the family who could see what was really happening and was willing to fight alongside me. The truth always finds a way to surface, and it usually comes from the place you least expect it. The house on Maple Street had never looked more beautiful than it did that Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Laura had thrown me out into the snow. Every window blazed with warm yellow light. The front yard was decorated with enough Christmas displays to power a small town, and cars lined both sides of the street as the extended family gathered for what they thought would be just another holiday celebration. I sat in my car for a moment before going in, looking at the scene I had paid for but been excluded from 12 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. Laura had spent my money decorating my house for a party where I would once again be treated like an unwelcome guest, but this time I was ready for them. The manila envelope on my passenger seat contained documents that would change everything. Harold had delivered them to me that morning, along with his final words of advice. Remember, Edward, you control the timing now. Let them show everyone who they really are, before you show everyone who you really are. David had kept his promise and flown in from Colorado the day before. He was the first person to greet me at the door, wrapping me in a bear hug that felt like coming home. Dad, you look great. That health scare back in October had me worried, but you seem stronger than ever. I feel stronger than ever, I said. And it was true. The months of planning, of building my case, of watching Laura and Sam dig their own graves, had given me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Laura appeared in the hallway behind David, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Edward, so glad you could make it. We're just about to start dinner. The dining room was packed with relatives, many of whom I hadn't seen since last year's disaster. My brother's family from Ohio, Michael's cousins, from his mother's side neighbors who had become like family over the decades. The same people who had witnessed my humiliation last Christmas were here to witness whatever came next. Sam was holding court at one end of the table, telling some story about a business deal that had made him sound more successful than I knew he actually was. He nodded at me when I entered, the gesture of a man who thought he had already won. Uncle Edward, he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. How are you feeling? We were all so worried about your heart problems. Every conversation in the room stopped. 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at me, waiting to see if I was going to collapse at the dinner table. I'm feeling remarkably well, actually, I said, taking my assigned seat at the far end of the table. Turns out it was just stress. Amazing how much better you feel when you identify the source of your problems. Laura's smile flickered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Well, that's wonderful news. We're just so grateful you're here with us. The dinner conversation flowed around me like I was a rock in a stream. Laura and Sam dominated the discussion, talking about family finances and Michael's business prospects and the importance of forward-thinking financial planning. They weren't subtle about it. Every topic somehow circled back to money, to responsibility, to the need for families to make practical decisions about their futures. Edward's generation built wealth through hard work and careful saving. Sam said at one point, raising his wine glass in what looked like a toast, but felt like an obituary. But our generation has to be smarter about growing that wealth, making it work for the whole family. Absolutely, Laura agreed. It's not enough anymore to just save money. You have to invest it wisely, manage it professionally, think about tax strategies and estate planning. I caught Karen's eye across the table. She was watching Laura and Sam with the expression of someone watching a car accident in slow motion, knowing exactly how it was going to end. After dinner, we moved to the living room where the football game was playing on the big screen television I had bought Michael 3 Christmases ago. The seating arrangement was subtle but deliberate. Laura and Sam claimed the prime spots on the couch with Michael beside them, and Emma curled up in the big armchair. David found a spot on the floor near the coffee table, and Karen and her family took the love seat. I was left with a folding chair that had been set up in the back corner of the room, as far from the television and the action as possible, without actually being in another room. The message was clear. I was tolerated, but not welcomed, included, but not valued. But I didn't mind. From my corner, I could watch. Everyone could see Laura whispering comments to Sam during commercial breaks, could observe the way Michael kept glancing at me, with an expression that might have been guilt or might have been calculation. The game was a good one, close enough to keep everyone engaged, loud enough to provide cover for the whispered conversations happening around the room. During halftime, Laura made a point of asking if I needed anything, if I was comfortable, if the chair was okay for my back. The performance of a caring daughter-in-law for an audience that was starting to pay attention. "I'm fine," I told her. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I feel like I've got my energy back." "That's wonderful to hear," she said. But her eyes were calculating, probably wondering what my renewed health meant for whatever timeline she and Sam had been working with. As the third quarter started, I stood up from my folding chair and walked to the center of the room. The sudden movement caught everyone's attention, and David reached for the television remote to lower the volume. "Sorry to interrupt the game," I said, pulling the manila envelope from my jacket pocket, "but I have something I need to share with everyone while we're all together." The room went completely quiet. Even Emma looked up from her phone, sensing that something important was about to happen. A year ago, almost to the day, I stood outside this house in the snow, holding a Christmas present for my granddaughter, and feeling like I had lost everything that mattered to me. Laura started to say something, but I held up my hand. Tonight, I'm standing in this same room, surrounded by the same family, but everything has changed. Not because of my health, not because of my age, but because I've spent this year learning who my real family is and who has been pretending to be family while planning something very different. I could see Sam shifting uncomfortably on the couch, could see Laura's smile starting to slip. Tonight I have a gift that's too big for any Christmas tree to hold. A gift of truth and justice, and the kind of clarity that only comes when people show you exactly who they are. The envelope felt substantial in my hands, weighted with the power to change everything. Around the room, I could see the different reactions playing out in real time. Emma looked confused but curious. David was alert and supportive. Karen looked like she was holding her breath. Michael appeared terrified. And Laura and Sam looked like they were watching their world start to crumble. Before I open this, I continued, I want everyone to remember that Christmas is supposed to be about family, about love and loyalty, and taking care of the people who matter most to you. I met Laura's eyes directly for the first time all evening. It's also about truth, and tonight we're going to have a lot of truth. Be patient until the moment of confrontation arrives, and you'll control exactly when and how the battle begins. I reached into the manila envelope and pulled out the small digital recorder, the same one I had bought at the electronics store nearly a year ago. The device looked insignificant in my hand, just a piece of black plastic and metal, but everyone in the room was staring at it like it was a loaded gun. Before I share what's in these documents, I said, holding up the recorder, I think everyone should hear something. A conversation that took place in this house last December, just a few days after I was asked to leave. Laura's face had gone completely white. Sam was gripping the arm of the couch so hard his knuckles were showing. Michael looked like he was about to be sick. I pressed play. Laura's voice filled the room crystal clear through the silence. He's getting more difficult every day, Sam. We tried to get him to sign the power of attorney, but he refused. Sam's voice responded, No, Michael was useless as usual. I know, but we can't wait forever. Maybe we need to push harder. What do you mean make him sign the property on Cedar Street that could work? If we can get him to sell that, we'd have enough to move forward with the investment. The recording continued for another 30 seconds, but I could have stopped it there. The room was so quiet I could hear the football game still playing softly on the television, the announcers' voices a surreal backdrop to the destruction of my family. Emma was the first to break the silence. Mom, what are they talking about? Laura tried to speak, but no words came out. She looked around the room desperately, like she was searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Sam tried to recover. Edward, this is obviously some kind of misunderstanding, taken out of context. Context. I stopped the recording and looked at him. The context is that you were planning to force me to sign documents against my will so you could steal my property. Nobody was stealing anything, Sam said, but his voice was shaking. We were trying to help the family make smart financial decisions. That's when Karen stood up from the love seat, her laptop in her hands. Dad asked me to help him understand what was really happening, she said, her voice steady and clear. So I did some investigating. She opened the laptop and turned it toward the room. These are emails between Sam and Laura, planning exactly how they were going to take control of Dad's money. Karen began reading from the screen. Quote, "We need to regroup and think longer term. Once Edward passes, the trust can be contested if we can show he wasn't of sound mind when he created it. Start documenting every example of erratic behavior, every sign of mental decline." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Several relatives gasped audibly. David's face had turned dark red with anger. Karen continued reading. "We're looking at potentially 15-20 million for your family alone, maybe more, if we can show that David and Karen were less involved in Edward's care. They were planning to steal from all of us," Karen said, closing the laptop. "Not just Dad. They were going to contest his will, claim he was mentally incompetent, and divide his assets based on who they could manipulate and who they couldn't." I looked around the room at the faces of my family and friends. Shock, disgust, anger, disbelief. 20 people who now understood exactly what kind of people Laura and Sam really were. $50 million. I said, letting the number sink in. That's what I built over 40 years of work. That's what they were planning to take. I pulled the legal documents from the envelope, the trust papers, and the new will that Harold had prepared. But here's what's actually going to happen with that money. It's going to go to the people in this family who understand what family actually means. People who value loyalty and integrity over greed and manipulation. Laura finally found her voice. "Edward, you can't do this. Michael is your son. Emma is your granddaughter. You can't punish them because you're angry with me." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said quietly. "I'm rewarding the people who deserve to be rewarded." That's when Michael completely broke down. He had been sitting frozen on the couch throughout the recording and the email revelations, but now the full weight of what had happened seemed to hit him all at once. "Dad," he sobbed, his voice barely recognizable. "Oh God, Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have stopped her. I should have protected you. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I was scared I was weak. I let her convince me that it was for the best." He was crying openly now, his whole body shaking. "You spent your whole life taking care of me, paying for everything, giving me everything, and I let her treat you like garbage. I let her throw you out of your own house on Christmas. What kind of son does that—" "Michael," I started, but he wasn't finished. "I don't deserve your money. I don't deserve to be your son. I failed you in every way that matters." Around the room, people were crying. Emma had gotten up from her chair and was standing beside me, her hand on my arm. David looked like he wanted to hit someone. Karen was watching Laura and Sam with undisguised contempt. I looked at Sam, who was trying to make himself invisible on the couch. "Sam, what you've done goes beyond family betrayal. Elder financial abuse is a felony in this state. Conspiracy to commit fraud is a felony. Harold thinks the district attorney would be very interested in these recordings and emails." Sam's face went ashen. "Edward, please, I was just trying to help the family. You were trying to help yourself to my family's money." I turned back to the room, holding up the trust documents. "The Edward Miller Family Trust will provide for my children and grandchildren who have shown they understand what family means. David will serve on the board of trustees. Karen will oversee the charitable foundation we're establishing. Emma will have her college education paid for, and a substantial inheritance when she turns 25. And Michael," Laura whispered. I looked at my son still crying on the couch, broken by his own guilt and shame. "Michael will have a chance to prove he's learned what loyalty means. But that decision will be up to the trustees based on his actions going forward, not his words tonight." Laura let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "You can't do this. That money belongs to Michael. I've invested years in this family. You've invested years in planning how to steal from this family, I corrected, and now everyone knows it. The room erupted, then relatives who had been silent suddenly finding their voices expressing their disgust and anger at what they had witnessed. Sam tried to leave, but David blocked his path. "You're not going anywhere until Dad decides what he wants to do about the police," David said. As the chaos swirled around me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Peace. Not satisfaction, not revenge, not even relief, but simple peace. The truth was, out the masks were off, and everyone could see exactly who was who in this family. When the truth finally comes out, the masks fall away. Justice doesn't need to shout. It has its own power. The chaos in the living room began to settle, as the weight of what had just happened sank in for everyone. Some relatives were whispering among themselves, others sat in stunned silence, and a few were openly staring at Laura and Sam like they were looking at strangers. Emma was the first to move. She walked across the room with tears streaming down her face and wrapped her arms around me in the fiercest hug I had received in years. "Grandpa," she whispered against my chest, "you're my real family. You always have been." I held her tight, feeling her shoulders shake as she cried, "You're mine too, sweetheart. You always will be." Over her head I watched as the room continued to process what they had witnessed. My brother Jack came over from the corner where he had been standing with his wife, extending his hand to me with a look of profound respect. "Edward, I had no idea what you were dealing with. I'm ashamed that I didn't see it sooner." One by one, others approached. Michael's cousin Robert, who had always been decent to me, shook my hand and muttered something about being sorry for not speaking up. Mrs. Patterson from next door, who had been coming to our family gatherings for 15 years, patted my arm and said simply, "You did the right thing." But not everyone was coming to pay their respects. Laura had gotten up from the couch and was gathering her purse and coat with shaking hands. Her face was streaked with mascara, and she kept making small, broken sounds like a wounded animal. "This isn't over," she said to no one in particular. "You can't just destroy a family like this. Michael, we're leaving. Now." But Michael wasn't moving. He was still sitting on the couch, staring at his hands, his face red and swollen from crying. "Michael." Laura's voice was getting higher, more desperate. "Get up. We're going home." "This is home," Michael said quietly. "This was always home, and I let you make me forget that. You're being ridiculous, emotional. You'll regret this tomorrow when you realize what your father has done to us." Michael looked up at her then, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years. Strength, resolution. The man I had raised finally standing up for what mattered. "Laura, for 5 years you've been poisoning me against my own father. You made me choose between you and him, and I chose wrong every single time. Not anymore." Laura's composure finally cracked completely. "Fine, stay here with your pathetic father and your dysfunctional family, but don't come crawling back to me when you realize what you've thrown away." She stormed toward the front door, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood floor I had paid to have installed. At the doorway, she turned back one last time. "Enjoy your blood money, Edward. I hope it keeps you warm at night." The front door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the Christmas ornaments on the nearby table. Sam had been trying to make his own quiet exit during Laura's scene, but David intercepted him in the hallway. "Where do you think you're going, cousin?" David looked this whole thing got out of hand. I was just trying to help the family make some smart financial decisions. By conspiring to commit elder abuse and fraud, Harold had briefed me on exactly what Sam's legal exposure might be. "Sam," I called out loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, "my attorney will be in touch with you next week. What you did has consequences beyond this family." The state of Ohio takes elder financial abuse very seriously. Sam's face went white as he realized that his problems were just beginning. "Edward, please. I have a family too. I never meant for any of this to happen. You meant for all of this to happen. The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught." I pulled out my phone and showed him Harold's text from earlier. My attorney already filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services. Elder financial abuse carries a 5-year sentence in Ohio, Sam. Conspiracy to commit fraud is another 3 years. You're not just losing family tonight, you're facing real prison time. Sam's legs nearly gave out. Edward, please, I have kids in college, I can't. You should have thought about your kids before you tried to steal from mine. I pulled out my phone and showed him Harold's text from earlier. My attorney already filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services. Elder financial abuse carries a 5-year sentence in Ohio, Sam. Conspiracy to commit fraud is another 3 years. You're not just losing family tonight, you're facing real prison time. Sam's legs nearly gave out. Edward, please, I have kids in college, I can't. You should have thought about your kids before you tried to steal from mine. Sam left without another word, slipping out the back door, like the coward he had always been. With Laura and Sam gone, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. People began talking normally again, processing what they had witnessed, asking questions about what would happen next. Emma stayed close to me, not willing to let go of my hand. Karen was explaining some of the legal details to relatives who wanted to understand how the conspiracy had worked. But it was Michael's transformation that moved me the most. He had gotten up from the couch and was moving around the room talking to family members, apologizing for his behavior over the past few years, accepting responsibility for allowing Laura to manipulate him. When he finally came to me, his eyes were clear for the first time in months. Dad, I don't know how to apologize for what I've done. I don't know how to make up for the years I wasted being weak and selfish. You start by being the man I raised you to be, I said. The man I always knew you could be. From now on, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to protect this family the way you protected all of us. I'm going to be the son you deserve. You already are, Michael. You already are. As the evening wound down and relatives began heading home, I found myself standing in the living room, where it all began a year ago. The Christmas tree was still twinkling in the corner. The same decorations were hanging on the walls. Even the same football game was probably still playing on the television, though no one was paying attention to it anymore. David came up beside me, putting his arm around my shoulders, the way he used to when he was a teenager. How do you feel, Dad? I thought about the question for a moment, looking around the room where my real family was gathered. Emma was helping Karen stack dishes, chattering excitedly about college applications and her plans for the future. Michael was talking quietly with his cousin Robert about taking over more responsibility in managing family affairs. The people who mattered, the people who had proven their loyalty, were still here. A year ago tonight, I said, they threw me out of this house on Christmas Eve. I stood in the snow outside that front door feeling like I had lost everything that mattered to me. I paused, watching Emma laugh at something Karen had said, seeing Michael shake hands with relatives and promise to stay in better touch. But Christmas has a way of bringing justice, doesn't it? They thought they could use my love for this family against me. They thought they could steal my life's work and destroy everything I built. But they forgot something important. What's that? Money can divide people, but loyalty holds them together. Real family isn't about inheritance or bank accounts or who gets what when someone dies. Real family is about standing up for each other when it matters most. I looked at my son, my daughter, my granddaughter, and all the people who had chosen to stay after the truth came out. They kicked me out last Christmas, but Christmas brought me justice. And more than that, Christmas brought me home. Emma appeared at my side, still holding the trust documents. Grandpa, does this mean we're going to be okay? Sweetheart, we were always going to be okay. We just had to find out who we really were first. As I watched my family clean up the remnants of the most important Christmas dinner of our lives, I realized that sometimes the best gifts are the ones that cost you everything, but give you back what truly matters. Sometimes you have to lose a family to find out which people actually belong in it. And sometimes, if you're very patient and very careful, Christmas brings you exactly the justice you've been waiting for.